Hi, this is Nando from CNC Commentaries, and on this episode of CNC Movie Breakdowns, we're going to be looking at Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. It's our final installment in the Lord of the Rings franchise here. It's for the main trilogy. And I am, of course, joined by my gracious co-host, Chase.
You shall not pass. Or you can, I really don't care. We're finishing up The Lord of the Rings.
Yep, we're finishing up the main Lord of the Rings movies here. And it's been quite a journey. That's for sure. I know, but we're looking at Return of the King today. It's probably the most famous out of the three and the most critically acclaimed.
Oh, well, definitely the most critically acclaimed, as I'm sure we'll talk about later on. But this won a few Oscars.
Yeah, this one won like fucking 10 billion Oscars. And yeah, I think it's definitely pretty good. I think it's undoubtedly the best out of the trilogy. But more of that later. Here before we dive on in, why don't you give us a little synopsis?
Well. Okay, so Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King is the final of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Came out in 2003, and basically it's the big culmination of everything. We have all the hobbits and everyone, and they're going to Mordor, and we're going to find out if they finally destroy that ring. And basically, there's a lot of battles and killing of armies. And they go all the way to Minas Tirith. And yeah, the king, spoiler alert, the king does return.
Yes, he does. But anyway, yeah. So let's go into our kind of initial thoughts here. Obviously, this is the climax, the finale. It is definitely large in scale. That's for sure.
Well, all of these films are large in scale, but
this one in particular, it's got a lot.
This is the big finish.
Yeah, it's got a lot going on. Like, a lot of stuff happens in this movie. There's a lot of big battles. There's definitely a lot of death, a lot of destruction. But you know what? It definitely ends the story in a very good way. Anyway, what about you, Chase? What was your initial thoughts when you finished this film?
Well, I mean, I think you said it earlier, and we'll get into more reasons later, but I'm inclined to agree with you that this is my favorite out of the trilogy. Just because, I think the main thing with this is, this is the big finish, and if this didn't stick the landing, then I'm sure everyone would kind of be wondering, was it worth all this buildup? But I think the fact that this entire trilogy was basically filmed, in unison. It was kind of like you weren't ever really going to have that problem of, will it stick the landing and, drive it home. I think it always kind of would, just because, it was all filmed in one block, and I think the hardest part was probably just figuring out where are they going to chop it up for each movie.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed this. Yeah.
Yeah, and with that done, let's dive on in. So, this movie begins with Gollum's backstory.
Yes. And as always, of course, we're not going scene by scene. This is 4 hours. I think we watched the extendeds, right?
Yeah, we watched the extended cut.
And it certainly adds a lot. But yeah.
Yes, so this story starts with Gollum, or Smeagol's backstory, and basically, him and his hobbit friend were just chilling, fishing in a river, and then...
we got Smeagol and Deagle chilling on a boat.
Yeah, and then Deagle here, he just happens to go down, and he uncovers the One Ring, the magic artifact that, leads this whole series to happen. He just happens to find it on the riverbank, and Smeagol, after immediately when seeing it, he murders his fellow hobbit and takes it for himself.
Yeah, well, something that I found interesting in particular when watching this part that I forgot about was it's kind of Deagle that like starts off like the altercation between them,
Yeah.
and then you know that leads Smeagol to like choke him out, kill him.
Yes. Murder. Anyway, so that's Gollum's origin story. We get like a little montage of him transforming into the creature that he is today. And you definitely see him devolving. We see him as a normal hobbit, then devolve into what he is today. But then, we cut to Gandalf the White at this point, and Treebeard, Merry and Pippin. They have now, defeated Saruman's forces, and they're talking to Saruman, who's, on top of his tower. And he's obviously not very happy that his forces were defeated. And so he's pretty pissed off, and he tries to kill Gandalf, but Gandalf, being the wizard that he is, absolutely destroys him. Destroys his staff. And eventually, Wormtongue, who Saruman kind of bullies, and
he just like slaps him in the face and just smacks him on the ground.
Yeah. Eventually, he gets tired of his shenanigans and gives him a knife in the back. And then Saruman falls onto this like little water wheel and gets impaled, and that's the end of Saruman, the evil wizard. But before Saruman dies, he drops this little like circle thing. It's called the Palantir, and it's like a seeing eyeball, and it allows Sauron to see through the Palantir what's happening. And Pippin is particularly interested in it. And he eventually, later, when everybody is sleeping, he takes it from Gandalf and he looks into it, and he talks with Sauron directly, and that's obviously not a very pleasant experience for him. And yeah. But now, Frodo and Sam, they're not having a good time, are they, Chase?
Oh no, they're not. They're on the side. They're going up to Mount Doom first off, and as we've stated before, that's not going to be an easy trip to get to, and that's not going to be the most fun place to climb up.
No, it is not. So, Frodo and Sam are not having a good time. Obviously, they're going to have to travel through harsh conditions, and not to mention that Frodo's carrying this, evil ring that is constantly trying to influence him.
Well, and Sam is both literally and figuratively carrying Frodo throughout this film.
Yeah. Spoiler alert here. Samwise Gamgee is the true hero of the Lord of the Rings, because he definitely hard carries Frodo here, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah, I mean, you and I both agree on this that Sam is like he's carrying the weight of everything between them.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, Frodo's just whining, if we're being honest.
I don't really blame him. At this point, he's been carrying this ring for like 13 months, and he is hanging on pretty good to not be.
I mean, I'm not saying I would do much better, to be fair.
Yeah, and he's done a really good job of not being corrupted by the ring, but his luck is ending. And I think this is definitely the film that we see him get. We definitely see him get corrupted by the ring. Especially towards the end. But they're obviously going through very harsh conditions, and Gollum is definitely out to murder them at this point. And Sam's trying to, expose Gollum and the fact that he's, meaning to murder them, but Frodo doesn't exactly believe him.
Yeah, and you would think he would at this point, because an interaction like this happens in like every film, where it's a he said type of thing, with Gollum trying to kill him or not.
Yeah, and we definitely get a few altercations like that where Sam tries to beat Gollum and then Frodo stops him. But then, obviously, it's very it's established pretty early on that Gollum's plan. Well, first his plan is to guide them through a mountain pass that houses Shelob, the giant spider. And his plan is to just lead them into the tunnel where Shelob lives, have Shelob kill them, and then once Shelob throws out the clothes, he gets the ring. And or he can just have Sam and Frodo kill each other, and then he grabs the ring. So he's definitely trying to drive Sam and Frodo apart.
I'm not gonna lie to you. Out of those two options, I probably would pick the one without the giant spider.
Yeah, giant spider is very spooky in this movie. Shelob is not very polite. Anyway, so while that is happening, Gandalf, Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, they're traveling to, or at least Gandalf does, travels to the capital city of Gondor. Gondor is the big human nation. And, so Gandalf and Pippin arrive here, and obviously Gondor has no king right now.
Yet,
at least yet, because I think, as you can tell, the king definitely returns, but they kind of have like a steward. He's like looking after the throne, keeping it warm for the king. That's Denethor, and he is not a very nice person. He is Boromir and Faramir's father, and he definitely loved Boromir a lot more than Faramir. And he's pretty pissed that Boromir died, and so Pippin, in an act of great tomfoolery, offers his services to Denethor the remainder of his life. And obviously Gandalf's pretty pissed about it because he instructed Pippin to not speak when he was talking to him. So this Denethor character, he appoints Pippin to be a guard of some sort because he knows that the city is going to be attacked soon. And Denethor is too grief-stricken and too much of an ass to do anything about it. So he's just kind of waiting for their doom at this point. And so that's when Gandalf and Pippin decides to take matters into their own hands, and they light the beacons of Gondor. In a really cool scene, we see that Gondor has this emergency system, where if a beacon is lit, they have a system of beacons that if they're all lit on fire, that's letting all the other human kingdoms know that Gondor needs help. And so,
it's basically a warning system.
Yeah. And so now that the beacons are lit all the way to Rohan, and at Rohan you always got King Theoden and Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are there. And that's when we get this, and Aragorn rushes in after seeing the beacons are lit, and then he's like, "Oh, Gondor calls for aid." And then King Theoden finally agrees to help Gondor. So he gathers a bunch of cavalry men and women, and he gathers a bunch of them, and he sets out to help Gondor. Meanwhile, an invasion force is heading towards the capital city of Gondor, and it's not looking good for them because Gondor's armies are basically nowhere to be seen at this point. The steward is just not willing to call them back. And I definitely like the steward's character here because he's so hell-bent on letting Gondor fall because of his grief, and he really hates the idea of a king coming back. He's really hell-bent. He's very stubborn, and I like that about his character. Anyway, so the beacons are lit at this point. Rohan's gonna help them, and the invasion force arrives.
They start going in.
But at this point, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, after riding with the riders of Rohan for a bit on the way to Gondor, Elrond shows up. And he sits Aragorn down and he's like, "Hey, Arwen, you the love of your life is dying because Sauron's winning this war right now. Because, yeah, so Sauron's winning the war right now, and Arwen's like can't take it, so she's dying. So I've come here to give you this sword, and this is the sword that originally cut the ring off of Sauron's hand in the last big war they had over the ring." So
it's almost as if they should have been told about this sword a few movies earlier.
Yeah, I mean we saw the sword get broken in Fellowship.
Well, yeah.
But we didn't think it had any deeper meaning there. But it's been reforged. And so Aragorn realizes that he can now claim the throne of Gondor. And so he's like, "Oh, I know where to find backup. Because sure, we might have a lot of Riders of Rohan here, but it's not going to be enough." So himself, Gimli, and Legolas set out. And they go out to recruit the spooky ghost army. And they go to this like ancient cave, and it's a bunch of like cursed souls. It's like criminals, murderers, those sort of people. And they're
creepy skeleton looking like hordes of beings, and it's just good ghosts.
Ghouly ghosts. So they arrive in this cave, and obviously it's pretty spooky. But Aragorn can now command this army because he has the rightful heir. He is the rightful heir to Gondor's throne. So he's like, "Hey, if you help us defend Gondor's cities, I'll let you free." So they make an oath, and the oath is now set, and so Aragorn has a ghost army. Of course, nobody knows this at this point, but we're getting there. So now the huge orc invasion force is now outside the city, outside Gondor's capital city here. And the steward of the throne decides to send Faramir, his only son, and basically all the soldiers in Gondor to a borderline suicidal cavalry charge to drive the enemy back. And of course, when it ends terribly, Faramir is the only survivor, and he's like barely alive. His horse carried him back. And the steward is like, "Ah, my lion is dead. I'm so sad," because he kind of treated Faramir like a piece of garbage. That's like a whole that happens to Faramir throughout this trilogy. I feel kind of bad for the guy.
Yeah, he gets the short end of the stick a lot.
Yes. Especially when it comes to his father, because Boromir was definitely the favorite child.
Yes.
So, after almost dying, he's like, his father is like, "Okay, my lion's dead. It's over. We lost." So he prepares to kill himself and his son. His son is basically dead to him at this point, despite the fact that his son is very much alive, just kind of in a coma. And the battle is looking very grim. I really love the siege here, because the orcs bring out all these siege weapons, and Gandalf's like riding through the ranks of the Gondorian soldiers.
You got these like giant catapults. And there's even a part where Gandalf is like, one-on-one fighting with his staff.
Yeah, and Pippin gets in a few good hits. He kills some orcs with his sword, but obviously the battle is not looking great. They're quickly getting overrun, and that's especially the case when the main gate of this city gets breached by this gigantic battering ram that the orcs brought. And so, when all is seemingly lost, that's when the Riders of Rohan show up. So they show up behind the orcs line and they do this massive cavalry charge. And this battle is probably my favorite in the entire trilogy. Like, sure, it might be extremely large, but there's just so much going on, and there's it definitely feels like, a battle. There's a lot of death happening, a lot of people are getting massacred. Definitely feel the heroic, effort of the charge, as immediately some of the soldiers on their horses get shot down. But they penetrate the orcs' lines, and they're slaughtering these guys. It is quite the battle. And eventually, they drive a lot of the orcs back, but that's when the giant elephants show up.
Yes. These elephants. I don't know how you think it's a fair fight. I would be scared out of my mind if I was riding on a horse, and then I just see, it's probably, 4 times the size of a regular elephant?
Yeah, probably.
All these people should be trampled in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, and that definitely happens. So these gigantic ass elephants show up, and King Theoden, in a classic blunder, he arranges for another cavalry charge, and he tries to charge with his horses the gigantic war elephants. I don't even know what they're called, if we can call them elephants at this point. These guys are so massive they have a second set of tusks.
Yeah.
And it ends as well as you expect it to, because it's a bunch of horses against these guys, against these behemoths, and a lot of them get immediately trampled. But Aragorn at this point, the guys maneuvering the elephants are mortal followers of Sauron. They aren't orcs. These guys are just regular old guys. But eventually, the guys would have gotten mercenary reinforcements. But that's when Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli show up to stop the mercenaries from attacking. So they kind of block their path with the boats, and the mercenaries initially laugh at them, because how can they expect 3 guys to stop a whole fleet of mercenary ships? And this is, of course, where we get the Peter Jackson cameo.
Yes, Peter Jackson gets shot with an arrow.
Yes.
So very over the top with his death.
Yeah. So Peter Jackson was playing mercenary, and Aragorn was like, "Hey, Legolas, you should shoot a warning shot at these guys to tell them back off." And then Gimli is like, "Oh, watch your aim," and then he bumps Legolas to mess up his aim. And that's when Peter Jackson gets shot. And the mercenaries are like, "Oh, how are you gonna stop us? You and what army?" And then Aragorn summons the Ghost Army, and they absolutely massacre the mercenaries.
Meanwhile, everybody now is wondering how they're supposed to finish filming the movie.
Yes. It is obviously not a great plan to kill the director, in the middle of your movie. So, at this point, it is not looking good for the Riders of Rohan. A lot of them have been trampled. The massive war elephants are still around. But that's when Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli show up on the now empty mercenary ships. And they bring the Ghost Army.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the Witch King, the Chief Nazgul, is riding around on his drake. And oh boy, is he messing things up. Because a bunch of the Nazgul showed up on their drakes. And he even gets into a one-on-one fight with Gandalf and breaks Gandalf's staff. But he also attacks King Theoden, and King Theoden gets crushed by his horse. And right when the Nazgul is about to finish him off, that's when King Theoden's daughter shows up. And she's apparently really good at sword fighting, and so she's messing up this Nazgul. She is taking care of his business.
She's had a bit of training before this, probably.
Yeah. So she messes up the Nazgul, and you get that classic line where the Witch King is like, "No man can kill me," and she rips off her helmet, and she's like, "I am no man," and then stabs him in the face. So, apparently it's not impossible to kill the Witch King. It's just really hard. You gotta stab him in the head.
And you gotta be a woman.
And a woman. No man can kill him. And so, that's when the rest of the Ghost Army shows up, and these ghosts just massacre, Sauron's force here. They there's even that one shot of the ghosts absolutely swarming the war elephants. It's like a bunch of ants, since,
Yeah.
it's really hard to hit a ghost with a sword. It's a pretty impossible battle. So that's when, after they finish this battle and rout the orcs and everybody, the Aragorn releases the ghosts, and the ghosts kind of fade away. But at the same time, Denethor, the steward of the throne, is attempting to kill himself with his son Faramir, who is still alive at this point, by fire. So eventually Pippin and Gandalf show up, though, and they manage to save Faramir's life, but not before Denethor lights himself on fire and runs across and throws himself off the height of Gondor. I feel real bad for anybody who is standing beneath that cliff, because that must not have been a pleasant sight. Anyway, so after the battle's over, King Theoden is dead. He died by getting crushed by a horsey and mauled by a Nazgul.
Quite the way to go out.
Quite the way to go out. And Pippin and Merry reunite after the battle. They find each other. But we cut to Frodo and Sam, and now they have to deal with Shelob. But before they do that, Gollum finally succeeds in his plan. And he drives them apart by framing Sam for eating the last of their bread. And it's a really depressing scene where Frodo is deceived by Gollum, and he finally kicks Sam out. And there's that really sad scene where Sam starts to cry. He's been through.
I mean, yeah, this is his best friend.
Yeah.
They've been through this whole journey, and that must have been a damn good piece of bread.
Yeah. But now that Frodo is alone and Sam is no longer in this journey, Gollum finally he leads him to Shelob's tunnel, and it does not go well for Frodo. So Shelob starts to chase him, and Frodo manages to defend himself with a bit, because Frodo's got this magical flashlight that Shelob doesn't like. So he manages to evade her for a while, and he finally gets into a fight with Gollum and throws Gollum off a cliff. But that is not the last of him. But eventually, as Frodo is making the journey, Shelob sneaks up on him and gets him with the stinger, and he is paralyzed.
Yeah, at this point, Frodo basically becomes mummified.
Yeah,
to a certain extent.
He gets wrapped up in Shelob's web.
And at this point, I'd cut my losses and say, well, we had a good run.
Yeah, but as Sam was climbing down, we kind of cut to him. He finds the bread, and he realizes that Gollum has bamboozled him. And so he makes his way back up, and he arrives just in time before Shelob is about to eat Frodo. And he picks up Frodo's sword and the flashlight, and he gets into a fight with the spider. And this is a giant spider. This is 4 times his size. And surprisingly, Samwise Gamgee manages to take home the W. And
I mean, yeah, apparently 2 legs will outrun 8. So
he's also got the magical flashlight. And,
oh yes,
and his
very scary flashlight.
And his apparently amazing climbing skills of a hobbit.
Very nimble toes.
Yes. And so he manages to stab Shelob in the abdomen and he makes Shelob run away. And as he sees Frodo's mummified, I don't know how to corpse, but he's not really a corpse. He starts to cry because he thinks Frodo is dead, but then Frodo's sword's sting starts to glow because orcs are nearby, and he hides. And the orcs come to collect Frodo, and they realize that he's not dead. That Shelob hit him with the stinger that kind of puts him really close to death, but not quite there. He's in a comatose state. And yeah. So Frodo eventually wakes up in kind of this little dungeon area with Sam following close behind the orcs. And these orcs they've tied up Frodo, and they've taken everything. They've taken the ring. They've He thinks they've taken everything. They've taken his mithril armor. He thinks they've taken the ring. He's obviously not a great situation. And two orcs get into a fight over what they call the shiny shirt or Frodo's armor, and it definitely gives us like a demonstration into like orc antics. I think it's a really good world building scene because we see
it shows us how orcs might not be necessarily the brightest.
Yeah, the orcs get into a fight over like the shiny shirt, as they call it, and one of the orcs falls down into a bunch of other orcs, and the orc that was originally fighting for it, he was like, he tried to kill me, kill him, and then the orcs massacre him and cannibalize him. So, but eventually, Sam catches up to her, like, he gets to the room where Frodo's being held, and he is revealed here that Sam, fearing Frodo was dead, took the ring. And this is, in my opinion, this is an extremely important scene. Because Sam willingly gives the ring to Frodo. It's not like Frodo fights him for it. He willingly gives it to Frodo. And this shows the character of Samwise Gamgee. Because he manages to stave off the temptation of the ring. And I think that definitely shows us that, because I believe in this entire trilogy he is the only person to willingly give it up without like pressure, coercion, or violence. I believe he's the only one.
He's not corruptible, and he's just a good person, really.
Yeah, he doesn't desire much, and that's what the ring preys on, like your ambitions. That's why if you put the ring like next to most men, they'd be like off to rule Mordor in 5 minutes and do it right this time. And so Sam and Frodo disguise themselves as orc soldiers, and they try to pass off his ranks to the orcs, but eventually there is an orc inspection. And I had forgot this was in the movie because I didn't think the orcs were like advanced enough to have military inspections. But Sam and Frodo, like, they start like a fight, and all the other orcs start fighting. And he starts like this whole brawl, and that's what they use to get away. But the rest of the Fellowship, who is now grouped up at the city of Gondor, they're like, okay, we need to give Frodo an opening. We need to give Frodo and Sam like an opening, because they've discovered that Frodo and Sam are alive, and they need to give them an opening to like actually sneak past. So what they decide to do is they decide to have Aragorn with the reforged sword that like sliced Sauron grab the Palantir and taunt Sauron, and they're gonna launch like a really suicidal frontal assault on Mordor in order to buy Frodo and Sam time. Now this is putting a lot of faith onto Frodo and Sam, because if they don't, I'll get massacred. But we see basically the entire like combined forces of the humans in Middle Earth, and they ride out to basically the front door of Mordor. And I think it's an extremely intimidating scene, especially like when they arrive right outside the gate, and they arrive right outside the gate, and Sauron sends out one of his goons called the Mouth of Sauron. Yes,
this is probably one of my favorite scenes in this movie, honestly.
Yeah, it's definitely one of mine too. And the Mouth of Sauron, he's you can just see his mouth, and obviously
that's why they call him the Mouth.
Yeah, he speaks for Sauron, and he basically tells him like, oh yeah, you guys are fucked. You need to like submit to Sauron right now.
And those teeth are one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in a film.
The makeup is super good.
Yeah, it looks like his teeth are rotting and have like pus all over them, and then because like since he's just got like this big face mask on over him, that's all your eyes can be drawn onto is his teeth and his mouth.
Yeah. But eventually they have enough of his shenanigans and they cut his head off.
Yes, it reminded me very much of the Black Knight scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
Just chopping off the head. Yeah, it was just a flesh wound. And you would think if they just chopped off his head, that his mouth is still fine. He can still talk.
Yeah. And so we see after this happens, the human armies, they prepare for battle. And Sauron opens up the gate, the Black Gate of Mordor, and there must be millions of orcs back there. And their human forces are, they're pretty fucked. But we cut to Sam and Frodo, and at this point, we get one of the most depressing scenes in the movie, in which Sam gives Frodo the last of his water, and then Frodo's worried that there won't be enough water for the return home journey, and Sam, in a really sad moment, says, "I don't think there's going to be a return home journey." So at this point, Sam's pretty much accepted the basic, or the borderline fact at this moment in time that they're not making it back.
I mean, we've reached this point right here where they're about to drop the ring in.
I mean, yeah. At this point, Frodo can barely move, so Sam legitimately has to carry him to the base of Mount Doom, or to the entrance to Mount Doom. But that's where Gollum attacks, because he survived his little drop off the cliff. Gollum attacks them, and Sam is busy fighting him, and Frodo finally manages to find the strength, and he makes it into Mount Doom. The final stretch. So in Mount Doom, we get the scene when they're inside Mount Doom is, in my opinion, the best scene in the trilogy. Is by far my favorite.
Well, this is like the big climax that we've been waiting for this entire trilogy.
Yes, we've been waiting.
Like, obviously, it's not the climax of the film, but this is what we have come for.
Yes. So,
and the lighting in this scene in particular is so good, in my opinion.
So let's set the scene here. The human armies and the orcs are now battling, and not just that, Nazgul have showed up on their drakes and are now tearing apart the human forces. We obviously get that really sweet scene between Legolas and Gimli, where Gimli's like, "I never thought I'd die fighting side by side with an elf," and then Legolas is like, "What about a friend?" It definitely cements their character relationship built throughout this whole series. Nazgul are attacking, and the humans are definitely losing. That's when great eagles show up, and at this point, a big old troll is attacking Aragorn, and it seems as though it's gonna kill him because it pins him down. Then we cut inside Mount Doom. Sam makes it after throwing Gollum away, and Frodo is at the very edge. He's holding the ring over lava.
But surprise, Gollum's back.
I mean, not yet. And so Sam is behind Frodo, and Frodo's just kind of holding the ring there, and Sam's pleading with him, just let it go. And in probably my favorite scene in this entire trilogy, right when Sam says to let it go, his voice kind of fades out, and the lava and all the ambient noise fades out, and all you can hear is the ring whispering to Frodo. And finally, after 13 months, Frodo is corrupted by the ring. And so he turns to Sam, he rips the ring off the necklace, and he says, "The ring is mine," and then he puts it on his finger. And Sam screams no, and the great eye of Sauron turns to look at Mount Doom, and the Nazgul start flying over to Mount Doom to kill Frodo. That's when Gollum shows up. Gollum, he knocks out Sam with a rock, and he sees the footprints of the invisible Frodo, and he jumps on him, and he bites Frodo's finger off. in a very brutal scene. He bites Frodo's finger off, and Frodo, who's had enough of this, starts to battle Gollum, and eventually they both go over the edge and supposedly into the lava.
Yeah, there's this great scene where there's this great shot where Gollum is holding up the ring, and the camera goes out and through the ring and up, and it's a really well shot moment.
Yeah. So it turns out that Frodo had managed to grab onto the edge of the edge of the cliffside, while Gollum falls into the lava with the ring. And so it's almost as if Gollum feels no pain when he's in the lava, because he just kind of holds the ring up until his entire body is submerged. And it takes a little bit, but eventually the ring melts into nothing. And throughout this whole point, right before the ring melts, Sam's he's leaning over the edge trying to help Frodo up, and it almost looks like Frodo's about to let go of the ledge to join the ring, but then the ring finally melts, and he grabs Sam's hand, and they get up together. It's this point that the Great Eye finally explodes, destroying
volcanic eruption everywhere,
destroying Sauron. Mount Doom explodes. The Nazgul all die, the orcs start to run, and Frodo and Sam they're on a rock that's slightly up, so they're not in the lava on the mountainside, and they've accepted death at this point.
Fade to black.
They're honestly just telling each other oh, we have to remember the Shire as our final moments. And we get that really good line by Frodo where, after all this time, he finally has a moment of clairvoyance where he doesn't carry the ring anymore, and he's like, it's done. And then the two hobbits pass out on this rock. But then they are rescued by great eagles.
Yes, very Deus Ex Machina.
They're rescued by great eagles. And then we get to a really weird scene.
Yeah, this is where it kind of starts losing me. Well, not because at this point the story is done, and now it's just time to wrap things up,
yeah.
Tie up the loose ends, right?
Yeah. I'm of the opinion that Lord of the Rings has one of the best endings ever, and it has a near perfect ending. But this weird scene thrown in here for basically no reason. Frodo wakes up in a bed in Rivendell in the Elven lands, and we just kind of get the scene with no dialogue. It's just he wakes up, he starts laughing, and Gandalf's in the room and he starts laughing, and then all the characters show up in the room and they start laughing.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, if you were an outside audience member and you had no idea Lord of the Rings, let's say, what is going to be your takeaway from this scene in particular? Because I think that most people would think the whole it's just a dream trope, right?
Yeah.
And then it's I think it's very odd placement.
Yeah.
After a sentimental scene of Sam and Frodo, doing their final embraces on the side of the mountain and then being taken off.
Yeah. But after that weird scene is concluded, we finally see the return of the king. The titular event.
Yes.
We see it, and we see Gandalf lowering a crown on Aragorn's head and the white tree of Gondor is now blossoming, and everybody's there, and Arwen shows up, and herself and Aragorn, they kiss and supposedly get married. And we get a really great speech from Aragorn, and he's like, "Oh, this day belongs to not one man, but everyone, and we're gonna rebuild the world in peace." And everybody cheers. And then Aragorn meets with all the hobbits. They're standing in a line, and then he's like, "My friends, you bow to no one." And then he bows to them, and everyone at the ceremony bows to Frodo, Sam, Pippin, and Merry. And obviously Pippin and Merry are just there, but I think they're truly bowing to Frodo and Sam. But I guess they're just marveling at the accomplishment that these two hobbits managed to do this. or these 4 hobbits managed to like partake in battle, which like none of their predecessors did. And now that the return of the king has happened, we get like a little time jump. It's like been a couple of years, and everybody's back at the Shire, and obviously nobody in the Shire knows what these guys did. They don't know.
Yeah, that's what I love. I love how they're able to just go back to their
humble lives.
Yeah, humble lives day to day as before. They're not touted as some, higher, greater heroes than they are. Because, while it's very easy, and I'm sure, they be thankful, being seen as, big heroes, it shows to a certain extent how they're not very ego focused, and they're just like, okay, yeah, we did that, but it's also like, we were thrown into it, and we did it, and now we're just back to our usual life.
I mean, the hobbits could have stayed in Gondor and been hailed as heroes for the rest of their lives, but they chose to come back to the Shire, where they would just be regular people again.
Well, and the people that know will always know.
Yeah.
And then, as we see, towards the end, Frodo's written this book called The Lord of the Rings.
There we are.
J.R.R. Tolkien ripped it off from Frodo.
Yeah,
so
that thieving bastard. And so we find out that he's added on to Bilbo's book, and he's added his own edition of The Lord of the Rings by Frodo Baggins. And we have the scene where they're all drinking at the tavern, and then Sam goes and finally confesses his love to that like barmaid that he's always loved, and they get married. And I really love this ending scene because it truly it gives Sam everything he wants, because Sam hard carried Frodo.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say to you, but there's in no way Frodo is a hero. Like he's a champion for being able to hold on to the One Ring for 13 months. But Samwise Gamgee, he put the team on his back. Yeah, he definitely hard carried the saving of the world part. He gave up the ring willingly. He carried Frodo both metaphorically and literally to Mount Doom. And at this point, Gandalf shows up in his cart, and all the hobbits travel to, and Bilbo's there. Bilbo at this point is extremely old because the life preserving qualities of the One Ring, he doesn't have the One Ring anymore. It's obviously destroyed at this point. So I think Bilbo has a really sad line where he says to Frodo, like, oh, you happen to have my old ring. I'd like to hold it one last time. Obviously, Bilbo's adventure was on a much smaller scale because he didn't save the world. He just kept the One Ring, but he did inspire Frodo to want to adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really sad to see him die. Still wanting the ring. Like he's dying when he still has ring withdrawal. That's a tongue twister. Oh yeah, and the story ends with everybody, as in Galadriel, all the elves. The elves is 3 rings. Their power is gone, so their lands aren't going to be preserved anymore. So they're just abandoning ship, and they're sailing away to the faraway lands. And they take Bilbo, and Frodo goes too. And we get this really sad scene where he says goodbye to his friends, and he's like, well, my time is done, my work here is done, I need to move on. He talks to Sam like, oh, Sam, we set out to save the Shire, and we saved it together. And he gives his book to Sam, and he tells Sam, listen, you write the last pages. You say how the story ends. And all the hobbits cry, and they all embrace, and it's a really sad scene. And we see after Sam returned home, he's had a bunch of kids. I think canonically he had 13 kids with Rosie.
Very, very busy.
Yeah. And he finishes Frodo's book and he publishes it, and it's such a good ending to The Lord of the Rings.
Sam publishes the book under the pseudonym J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah.
And that's the Return of the King.
Yes. One of the most beautiful endings to one of the most beautiful stories ever told. Why don't we go into our final thoughts here?
Oh, well, I thought, just briefly, it would be foolish for us to not talk about its Oscar wins.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure.
For a second, because this film was released in 2003, 2004 Academy Awards ceremony. It did something pretty big and historical. The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King was nominated for 11 Oscars, and it did a clean sweep, and it won all 11. This is something that no other film has really done to that scale in terms of going the full sweep like that. It's tied with Ben-Hur and Titanic for most Oscar wins at 11, but it's the only one to actually clean sweep 100%. And yeah, that's, it's an unheard of type thing. And I think really, if you think about it, I think the reason it probably won so much is, well, obviously, it's very deserving of a lot,
yeah.
But it's kind of rewarding in terms of the whole trilogy, because let's be honest, this isn't a 4-hour film. This is a 12-hour film chopped up into 3 parts.
Yeah. The films don't take breaks from each other. Like, they don't have, like, transitional parts. Like,
yeah, and there weren't breaks when it was filmed. So
no. Like, Return of the King picks up, like, right at, like, the second after Two Towers ended. So, yeah, they just made a 12-hour film and cut it into 3 pieces. You're right.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think it's, all the major awards it won, Peter Jackson winning Best Director, you have winning Best Picture, it's not every day you see a fantasy film winning Best Picture.
And just to be completionist, I will now name every single Oscar that I won. Won Best Picture, Best Original Song, Best Visual Effects, Best Original Score, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Production Design, Best Sound Mixing, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, and Best Film Editing. It won a ton of Oscars.
Took home a wheelbarrow full.
Yeah, it won a lot. And yeah, so it is definitely, I think it's definitely an amazing film. And now that I rewatched it, it's been a couple of years, and now that I've rewatched it with like a more analytical brain, I can definitely say this is one of my favorite movies of all time now. I think this movie is near perfect.
I mean, yeah. I mean, we've said it every episode, that even if like these types of films aren't your cup of tea, you still have to respect what it does in terms of filmmaking and in terms of the fantasy adventure genre, and just putting together something so ginormous of this scope. Yeah. And having it all work together basically seamlessly.
Yeah. It obviously works best for like someone like me, because I'm a huge fantasy fan. Like, I eat this type of stuff up. It's my favorite. So like seeing it done on this much of a scale is so good. And I think it's obviously a great adaptation of the books. I think these movies would make J.R.R. Tolkien very proud. And with that, why don't we rate the movie?
All right, Nando, would you like to go first with final thoughts and ratings?
Yes, final thoughts. This movie's amazing. Definitely one of my favorite movies of all time now. It's definitely made its way into the top 3. And with that, I'm giving this movie a well-deserved 10 out of 10.
He's done it again, ladies and gentlemen.
Again. I originally, before rewatching all the films, I originally thought that what I remembered, that none of these movies were 10 out of 10, that they were all really good, just not perfect. But this movie, it nails it. It's amazing. I love it. I will now rewatch it a lot more often.
I mean, yeah, honestly, with this one, this was my favorite out of the three. And this one is, this is the longest one. This one didn't drag for me at all. The other ones at some points did have moments, but this one I was felt in it the whole time. And, we've said everything we can about in terms of the technical brilliance of it. And it's just the perfect conclusion to a trilogy like this. And I would probably rate it I'd probably rate it an 8.5 or a 9, just because I don't see myself rewatching this often, but it's so damn good.
Yeah, really is.
It's good. It's a really good film, and I have to respect everything it's done. Even if I don't find myself rewatching it as much as you, but it's really good, and definitely my favorite of the three.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I guess that concludes our episode on Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. Concludes our trilogy.
Yes.
First ever.
We have first trilogy. First little mini series we've kind of done. I mean, and we have a lot coming up. We're going to do a bonus episode for sure.
Yeah.
Should we say what that's going to be now?
I mean, why don't we leave it in suspense?
Okay, we'll leave that as a surprise, but tune in, and it may relate closely to something we've recently covered.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then
I'll give a little tease.
Yes, because the viewers, if you don't know, we switch off often from episode to episode. Each one of us picking of the movie we want to talk about, and these were your picks for us to talk about.
My trilogy.
So the next three movies we're going to be talking about, they're all going to be picked by me. So stay tuned.
Yeah, Chase picks.
They're not a trilogy though.
They're not a trilogy.
We're just gonna be going back into our regular, random crap.
So, the next movie we'll be covering, it's a classic. You've all watched it. You've all heard it. We're gonna be talking about the original Wizard of Oz, the 1930s version.
This is gonna be a very fun talk, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be it's gonna be an interesting episode to talk about, since this is definitely the oldest movie we've covered.
Oh yeah, it is.
It'll be Chase and Nando back in the 30s.
Yeah, we're one of these days we're gonna just do a month where it's just pre 80s films.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
With all that being said and done, thank you for watching. Have a good one. Bye.
Goodbye.